Hello, everyone. Hope you're having a fantastic day. My name is Kmart, and I want to talk about some basketball. And today, we are going to be doing something a little less serious here. Not news, just a little, let's just say experiment, as we are about maybe a month or two away from the start of the season. So we're going to take a look at every single team in the league here, and we are going to assume that every single team in the NBA has a shot at winning the NBA Finals and becoming the NBA champion for the 2023-2024 season. Now, I know technically speaking, that's already the case. Technically speaking, every team can win, but realistically, no, not really. But for the sake of this video, we are in fact going to assume that every single team in the league can in fact win the NBA Finals, and we're going to talk about what each of the teams need to do to actually make that happen. So, in short, how every single team in the league can win the NBA Finals. Now, obviously, some of these are going to be a little bit less serious than the others because there are some teams out there that really don't have too much of a chance. But we're gonna lean in and we're gonna pretend at least that every team has a shot and see what it would take for every team to claim that trophy. So I've rambled on long enough. Let's get things started here. We are going to be dividing things up between the conferences. So we will start with the West. So without any further ado, here is how every single Western Conference team can win the NBA Finals. We are going to go by division here, starting with the Northwest Division and the defending champion Denver Nuggets. This one's about as simple as it gets, folks. Stay healthy and just do it again. Run it back. The Nuggets are mostly the same team that just won the championship, minus a few pieces here and there, Bruce Brown sort of being one of the biggest one, but the core is still intact. So at this point, it's going to take either a massive injury or a massive ego to break this team apart. I don't see either one of those happening just yet. So the Nuggets just gotta not rock the boat. Meanwhile, team number 2 in the Northwest Division, the Minnesota Timberwolves. This one's a little more complicated. First and foremost, McDaniels and Rudy Gobert spearhead a top-tier, elite-level, top-5 defense in the league. Anthony Edwards drops an MVP caliber season, basically takes the play that he's had in the FIBA World Cup and just transfers it 1-to-1 to the NBA. And of course, Karl Anthony Towns plays more than half a season and doesn't disappear at random points in the postseason again. That would be kind of helpful if their, I guess at this point, secondary star weren't missing in action in playoff games. That's always kind of good for a team to win. But we'll move things along here. Team number 3 in the Northwest, the Oklahoma City Thunder. So, for OKC to win a championship, Chet Holmgren becomes basically a monster, an absolute just powerhouse on the court on both the offensive and defensive sides, and steals Rookie of the Year away from Victor Wembanyama. Shai Gilgeous-Alexander puts up MVP caliber numbers, kind of already doing that, but he continues to do it and more over the course of a whole season. And maybe most importantly here for the Thunder, at least one of the team's other young players emerges as a, not even really great, a decent or reliable third option and a solid defender. Whether it's Josh Giddey, Lou Dort, even maybe Jalen Williams. Well, one of the two Jalen Williams is, because there's multiple. Just somebody needs to be a clear third option here for the Thunder, and I think Chet Holmgren and SGA, if they do what they need to do, carries this team pretty far. Team number 4 in the Northwest here, the Portland Trailblazers. So, for the Trailblazers to win, one of two things needs to happen here. Option A, Damian Lillard rescinds his trade demand, decides to play for the Trailblazers again, averages 40 points per game, and quite literally drags this team to an NBA title all by himself. Option B, probably the more realistic one, which is saying something. Lillard does not play for the Trailblazers anymore. He gets traded away. Whoever the Blazers get back is some sort of all-star level player, and then they build around that. Anthony Simons Shaden Sharp and Scoot Henderson form the single most terrifying trio of young players that the league has seen in decades. Scoot wins a unanimous Rookie of the Year award, and around the edges, Jeremy Grant lives up to that new big ol' contract that they gave him, and Yusuf Nurkic stays healthy over the course of an entire season. So, the list of things the Blazers need to go their way is a long one, but you kind of knew that coming into it, didn't you? But final team here in the Northwest Division, the Utah Jazz. For them to win the title, Lauri Markkanen averages over 30 points per game, basically, and garners votes for MVP. The duo down low of Walker Kessler and John Collins becomes what we thought Karl Anthony Towns and Rudy Gobert would be in Minnesota, and they become elite on both ends of the floor. Probably more emphasis on the defensive than the offensive side, but basically both ways for those two big men. And last but not least, any guard on this roster becomes a reliable playmaking and defensive threat. Dunn, Clarkson, Talen Horton-Tucker, Agbaji, even Keontae George, right? The young guy. Anyone on that Jazz roster needs to sort of emerge as the clear playmaker for the Jazz to really do anything. But that does it for the Northwest Division. We move on to the Pacific Division, and we start with the Golden State Warriors. This one's a little straightforward. Step one, Steph Curry continues to be one of the greatest basketball players on the face of the planet. That's probably locked in already. Meanwhile, Klay Thompson, Andrew Wiggins, and Draymond Green all stay healthy and moderately productive. You know, none of them have to crack maybe 20 plus points per game, but continue to contribute over the course of a whole season. No one punches their teammates in practice and creates a dumb news story that we talk about for 75% or more of the season. That would be nice. And lastly, someone from the Warriors bench actually contributes in a reliable way. The bench really did kind of seem to disappear in some of the Warriors playoff games last season, so it'd be nice to have someone, especially now with Poole gone, who can help in some fashion once you reach the postseason, if they reach the postseason. But moving things along here in the Pacific Division, the Los Angeles Clippers, it's pretty simple for them. Step one, Russell Westbrook's revenge tour continues. And he just continues to go on a tear, average a relatively high assist count, score points where needed. But the main one here for the Clippers is going to be that Kawhi Leonard and Paul George actually stay healthy for an entire season, or most of a season even. I can't believe we're lowering the bar that far, but that is what we've come to here. That Leonard and George are healthy for most of a season and are both available to play in the playoffs finally for this Clippers squad, because they've been without one or both the whole way through. And frankly, their roster isn't built to play without their stars. Very few rosters are. So for the Clippers, it's all about health here. Meanwhile, we move things along to Los Angeles' other team, the Los Angeles Lakers. This one's pretty simple for them as well. Anthony Davis and LeBron James don't break down physically in the regular season. They make it the whole way through the regular season campaign without any major injuries. And for the secondary point, the team's offseason moves work as they were meant to, and the team basically doesn't have to reinvent the entirety of their roster at the trade deadline like they did last year. Now, obviously, that worked out pretty well for them. They made a run to the Western Conference Finals, but you would love to have your pieces in place before you've already played the first half of the campaign. That'd be nice. But we move along from the Lakers to the Phoenix Suns. Bit of an interesting one here. Step one for the Suns to win a title. Devin Booker, Kevin Durant, and Bradley Beal don't literally rip the ball out of each other's hands every possession, and they cooperate and play nice long enough to win games through sheer offensive firepower. Because these are three of the best scorers in the league, and as long as, again, they're not cannibalizing each other's touches, they will score a lot of points. Step two, DeAndre Ayton finds his motivation or whatever drive he needs that he says maybe has been kind of lacking in the past, and also ignores the fact that the internet is basically shitting on him every 5 minutes and just plays basketball. So I mean, they kept Dayton. They're expecting good things from him, so they're going to need him to meet those expectations. And speaking of expectations, for point number 3, the entirety of the Phoenix Suns bench just collectively manages to exist and help and just not make things actively worse, right? We know with this Suns lineup, the stars are going to lead the way 90+% of the time. For the bench, you're just there to not rock the boat. So as long as they do that, they should be fine. As we move along to the final team in the Pacific Division, that is the Sacramento Kings. They got a couple steps to work with here. Step 1, Domantas Sabonis is motivated by all the shit talk about him in the playoffs last season, and he turns in an MVP caliber performance. Step 2, De'Aaron Fox continues to be an all-star. He is still kind of getting slept on a little bit somehow, so just keeps playing at the level that he's at, maybe even takes a step forward and makes another all-star appearance. Step 3, obviously no one gets hurt, because we saw in the playoffs, outside of the star players, the bench for the Kings is a little inexperienced and a little not great if pressure's put on them. And that leads me into step 4. Someone from the bench, the Kings bench, manages to not shit their pants in the playoffs, because it was bad. When the starters hit the bench, the Kings just lost any and all momentum, really on both sides of the floor. So, gonna need the bench to step up just a little bit if the Kings want to have any chance. But with that in mind, one last division here in the West. It is the Southwest Division, and we're starting with the Dallas Mavericks. Step 1, Luka and Kyrie figure out what sort of went wrong in the last third of the previous season, and they form one of the most terrifying and dynamic guard duos in the entirety of the league. You've got a pair of all-stars. Kyrie maybe even sort of looking Hall of Fame-ish, depending on, I don't know, how much you want to sort of look at his stats and what he's done. So if they figure it out, they are going to be scary here. But more important than step 1 is probably step 2 here. Step 2, Grant Williams single-handedly changes the defensive culture of the Dallas Mavericks and actually gets them to play some defense. The Mavs were a, frankly, god-awful defensive team last year, and it didn't get much better after the Kyrie trade. In fact, I think their numbers went down a little bit. So they need someone to turn things around, change the culture. Grant Williams is a nose to the grindstone kind of guy. He's going to have to change that basically by himself. And step 3 for the Mavericks, someone in the power forward or center position actually becomes reliable. They don't have a whole lot to work with. The team just let JaVale McGee go. Their starting center, as of right now, I believe, is Dwight Powell, and in the best of circumstances, I think the best you can say is that Dwight Powell is just okay. And just okay at the center position is not going to win you a championship. So either one of the young guys steps up, or the Mavs end up trading for someone who can take that spot. But we shall see. We move along now to the Houston Rockets, though. Step 1 for the Rockets to win a title. Every other team in the league quits. That's it. And they just win it by default. That's the honestly most likely scenario for the Rockets to win a championship. But if we are actually going to talk about what it would take, it's a lot. First and foremost, Fred VanVleet hears all of the shit about his contract that people have been saying in the offseason and goes off on one of the single greatest MVP campaigns that we have ever seen, and just wipes away all discussion about his terrible contract. Step number 2 for the Rockets, Dylan Brooks decides to stop being an asshole and focuses all of his energy on playing, and actually backs up all of his talk with, winning basketball games. And step number 3, at least 2, maybe even 3 of the Rockets' sort of young players, the developing guys that they've been putting together, breaks out and suddenly becomes borderline all-star players. So the 2 guys that they brought in play at the absolute height of their ability, and then some of the young guys that they've been developing have to be immediately ready to compete, which, again, it's unlikely, but hey, it could happen. Moving along to a team with maybe higher aspirations, we take a look at the Memphis Grizzlies. Step 1 for the Grizzlies to win the title, Josh stops getting suspended for doing stupid shit. Being down your star player for the first 25 games of the season is not great, It's not a death sentence, but the Grizzlies could really, really do with Ja not getting suspended again. But assuming that they tread water long enough for him to come back, what else do they need? Well, step 2, Desmond Bane has to live up to that massive extension they gave him. It was basically a max contract or max extension. So he's got to continue to produce. He's been doing a pretty damn good job of it over the past couple of seasons, but he cannot sort of drop off now that he's got his bag. And step number 3 for the Grizzlies, Steven Adams is healthy for an entire season / postseason and forms a frankly legendary defensive trio with Marcus Smart and Jaren Jackson Jr., who presumably, wins Defensive Player of the Year here. Well, I guess any of them could win it, but I'm singling out Jaren Jackson Jr. because, well, obviously. But that is what they need. The Grizzlies need that trio to form one of the greatest defenses the league has basically ever seen, and the Grizzlies could be bringing home that trophy. But we move along here to our penultimate squad. It's the New Orleans Pelicans, and yeah, you probably know where I'm going with this one. For the Pelicans to win the title, they need one thing in particular, and that is Zion coming back and putting up MVP level numbers while avoiding any more off-court drama. This whole offseason has been sort of full of Zion stories that frankly don't have a whole lot to do with basketball, so the Pelicans need him back, they need him healthy, they need him producing at the level that he was pre-injury, and they would very much appreciate it if he could keep his name out of non-basketball related headlines. I feel like that's not too much to ask, but that is step 1. Step 2 for the Pelicans is that Brandon Ingram remembers how stupidly good at basketball he can be and just completely balls out, has an all-star season. We all forget about some of the comments he's been making as part of Team USA, where he feels underappreciated, underused, things of that nature. He just puts all that to bed, comes out here at the start of the season for the Pelicans, and just absolutely goes on a tear. And of course, for step 3 for the Pelicans, no one gets hurt, right? Zion, McCollum, Ingram, Valanciunas, they've got a lot of potential sort of points of failure here if somebody goes down, so they've got to stay healthy enough to compete across the entirety of the season. But with that being said, we move along now. It is time for the final squad in the Western Conference, final squad in the Southwest Division, and it is the San Antonio Spurs. So, for the recently tanking Spurs to win a title, quite a lot of things got to go their way. Step 1, Greg Popovich well and truly proves himself to be the greatest coach of all time, bar none, and actually gets this team to basically improve massively overnight, because that's what it's going to take. This was one of the worst teams in the entirety of the NBA, and Popovich would suddenly have to flip that around into a title contender in the span of about 3 months. That would be, I'm not going to say Hall of Fame because Pop is already in the Hall of Fame, but they'd have to invent basically a new tier of the Hall of Fame just for Greg Popovich by himself if he could pull this off. So the team's got to do everything. They got to get better on offense. They've got to play defense. They've got to not be a bottom tier squad in terms of defensive rating. So Popovich and the coaching staff have their work cut out for him. But outside of that, what else do the Spurs need? Well, they need Victor Wembanyama to immediately become one of the greatest players to have played basketball in the last 30 years, and to do that in his rookie season. They basically need Wembanyama to be, well, what can we say here? Prime Hakeem, right? Prime Olajuwon in his rookie season, basically, because that is what it would take to lift this team out of the basement. So Wembanyama is definitely a highly touted prospect, but he would need to put on something absolutely legendary for the Spurs to win it. And on top of that as well, Wemby can't do it alone. So step 3 for the Spurs, Keldon Johnson and Devin Vassell, who were both relatively good standout players for the Spurs last season, they don't regress, and they actually become reliable sidekicks, effectively, for Wembanyama. So it would be the single greatest turnaround in the history of the NBA for the Spurs, but you know what they say, hope springs eternal. Everyone starts at, 500 at the start of the season. Everyone's undefeated when the season begins. So that is how every Western Conference team can win the NBA Finals. I know I'm massively oversimplified, but hey, that's kind of the point, right? A lot of these are not so serious, but thought it might be fun to just take a look at what the best case scenario would look like for every squad in the West. So let me know what you think. Feel free to share your thoughts. Which of these scenarios do you think is maybe most or least possible? Even I was going to say realistic, but we're kind of stretching the definition of that word for some of these teams. But either way, thought it would be a fun little thing to run through. We'll go through the Eastern Conference teams in the next video, but for now, thank you all so much for watching, and I will talk to you later.